Jane was knitting in her living room. She was very happy knitting, as always, because it always relaxed her and took away a lot of stress if she was feeling stressed. Suddenly she spotted something out of the corner of her eye. There was a woman who seemed to be exhausted, resting up against her wall outside. She looked out the window, and the woman didn't seem to see her. Jane felt very sorry for the woman and wondered, was she in a weakness? So she went outside and asked her would she like to come into her house for a cup of tea. A few minutes later, the woman sat down at Jane's table, and Jane brought her a cup of tea. The woman said, "Thanks very much. You did your good deed for the day." She drank her tea. Then Jane nearly fainted with shock when the woman took out a gun and pointed it at Jane. The woman said, "Okay, I know you have lots of money in this house and jewellery, so hand it over or I'm going to shoot you." Suddenly the woman felt kind of dizzy. The gun lowered against her will and then fell to the ground. A few minutes later the woman came around. She must have fell asleep. Jane was standing in front of her smiling. It had then hit her that her tea had been drugged. The woman was tied to a chair and gagged, while Jane smiled at her and said, "You see, I actually thought you were tired. I thought you were in a weakness, and I would have still tortured you, but now that I know you were trying to rob me, well, that brings the torture to another level." Jane took out a drill and smiled, then drilled into the woman's knees as tears were rolling down her cheeks. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Tony was lying on the operating table after being in a near-fatal accident. The doctors were performing an emergency operation on him, and they knew that he was dying, but they kept trying to save him. God knows enough people died in this hospital lately, a doctor said. Tony could hear them speaking. Suddenly he heard one of the nurses say, "We have lost all vital signs." He then found himself falling in through a tunnel, and he remembered hearing about a dark tunnel and a light people see just before they die. He then was looking down at the operation table from floating above. He wondered, was this an out-of-body experience? Was he dead? He must be, if there were no vital signs. Then suddenly he heard a nurse speaking to him. "Don't give up. It's not your time to go. Keep fighting. Keep fighting. Don't give up whatever you do. Keep fighting." The nurse had a strong Irish accent. She continued to speak. "Tony, you have so much more to do in this world. Don't give up. Come back. Don't leave. Your time to go is not now." Suddenly, Tony wasn't floating over the bed anymore, but he was back in his body and could hear a doctor say, "Wow, that was something else. He was almost gone for 10 whole minutes." A nurse said, "Vital signs are stable." Tony smiled, and a few minutes later, he was speaking to the nurse. But he realised it wasn't the nurse that saved him by asking him to not give up. The nurse said, "You gave us all a fright, Tony, but what just happened was nothing short of a miracle. You were dead for 10 whole minutes." Tony said, "Can Could I please thank the nurse with the Irish accent, please? She kept telling me don't give up, and that is what made me pull back from crossing over. The doctor said, Tony, there is no one here with an Irish accent. Well, luckily we don't have the nurse with that accent around her anymore. Tony asked, why, what's wrong with her? The nurse said, the only nurse around here with an accent from Ireland was this crazy woman. She murdered 14 of our patients, and when she was found out, she shot herself in the head. Just before she did shoot herself, she started rambling on about she would make sure we all pay for getting her caught. Suddenly the woman froze, and the doctors, when the nurse with the accent from Ireland appeared and said, I made my penance after I killed those patients, and I proved it by bringing this patient back to life. But as for the doctors and nurses, who were the reason I was caught experimenting with murder, well, that's a different story. Within 2 minutes, everyone in the room were killed besides Tony. Soon after, the police were called, and Tony was arrested for multiple homicide of the nurses and doctors that were killed by the ghost of the nurse who saved him. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. It was summer in New Orleans when a pastor found out about a mysterious voodoo cult. He was sent an anonymous letter saying that the doom and evil would fall among their town if something wasn't done, and it had to be done from a man of faith. He was told there would be dolls hanging up around somewhere in the town. It needed to be ended by a man of faith. It needed to be a case that the man of faith cut the dolls down. He was shocked reading the letter, but a part of him was just dismissing it, thinking it must be some teenagers with nothing else better to do with their time than write a letter to the local pastor. But all of his skepticism changed in the next few days, when he was going for a walk in the woods, and he had seen lots of dolls hanging off trees. He didn't like the look of it, and put it down to some voodoo or black magic ritual. He came back a while later with his scissors, and cut them all down. He counted them individually, and there were 13 dolls exactly. He went home and was in shock while listening to the radio when the newsreader said, there has been 13 people in a local New Orleans town, Glenside, found dead under mysterious circumstances. It is not known yet what is the cause of the deaths, but the local police are looking for any witnesses or dashcam footage of any of the scenes. There were in various parts of the town. We will keep you updated on this story as more information comes into us. A few minutes later, he walked into his son's room, and his son was playing a computer game. It looked to be one of those violent games. The screen said, now cut the doll from the string it's hanging on in the ceiling and you will win the game. The son had just cut it before his dad walked in the room, and before his dad could get mad at him for playing another violent game, his dad dropped dead. The son screamed and ran over to his dad, not knowing that the so-called online game he was playing led to the death of his father. When the pastor cut the 13 dolls down, it had to be his own flesh and blood cut another doll down to the pastor be the 14th death. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content.